This video is going to be a long-term review on the Giant Anthem 27.5. I made a complete review a few months ago that I actually intended to be my last review on this bike, but this bike has been one of my longest running cross-country bikes, so I wanted to do this one as kind of a long-term report on the bike. For the past probably 7 to 10 years, I've changed my cross-country bike every season, so about once a year. And I did that because there was always just something about a bike that I didn't like. And I've had some really good bikes over the years, but either the handling or the maintenance or something that caused me to want to upgrade the bike or change out the bike the next year. This bike has been my longest running bike, and I've had it for 16 months, and that may not seem very long, but because of a partial bike shop sponsorship, I'm able to get a bike and just kind of keep it fresh or change a model if I didn't like something. This is one that I've held on to for a while, and I actually intend to hold on to this because of the longevity. I probably will look into replacing just the frame and fork on this bike just to keep it current, since this is a 2014 model, but it's in awesome shape and it's holding up really well. And I'm going to go on record and say that the Giant Anthem 27.5 is my favorite cross-country bike that I have ridden to date. And that's saying a lot, because I've ridden things like Turner Flux, Specialized Epic, Niner Jet 9 RDO, Niner Air 9 Carbon, some really good bikes over the years, and all of them were just phenomenal bikes, but this one has been my long-standing favorite. For me, the things that make a cross-country bike a great bike are, I classify them as 4 things. One, the bike has to be fun. Probably very few of us out there are going to make a professional living racing bikes, so having fun is the #1 thing. Also, you want a bike that's fast. The reason that you ride a cross-country bike and not a trail bike is because you want speed. If speed were not the name of the game, you probably go with a trail bike, which is more versatile. So the bike has to be fast. Also, the bike has to be comfortable. If you're spending a lot of time on the bike, in order to have fun, you're going to want to be comfortable. And finally, you want a bike that, and this is for my personal preferences, I like a bike that's low maintenance. Now, obviously, having a full suspension bike means that there's more maintenance than a hardtail. That's a given. But for a full suspension bike, this bike has been one of the lowest maintenance bikes that I have ridden. And let me just kind of show you some of the things that I've done on it recently to just kind of keep it fresh and keep it going strong. So just recently, what I did on this bike is I just replaced the hub bearings, and I made a video on that. You guys may have seen that, the Stan's hub bearing replacement video. So I changed out the bearings, and I also put on a new chain on this bike. I changed the derailleur housing and the cable. And I did also, I used the bearings. The bearings, when I pulled them out of the hubs, were still really good. I just, wanted to keep my hub spinning really smoothly. But the only issue I've ever had with this bike is just within the last couple months, I started just getting a little bit of a noise in the suspension, and it was just a little click every once in a while. And I put the 6905 and 6805 bearings that came out of the hubs, I put them down here in the main suspension pivots, and it quieted that noise. So maybe those bearings were just getting a little bit crusty, and they're not hard to change on this bike. Changing pivot bearings is probably, it's a little involved in the fact that you just got to take apart the pivots, but it's really not that bad, and you just tap them out, and if you have a bearing press, you press in the new one. So that seemed to take care of the issue. A couple other maintenance things that I've done, not really related to the frame, but I did bleed the rear brake. I had flipped the bike over one time and the brake got soft. It firmed back up with riding, but it showed me that the fluid levels were down a little bit. So I just bled the rear brake, and I also changed the oil in the fork and in the rear shock. Just something that I do about every 40 hours of riding. Again, not specific to any kind of maintenance problem, but just the routine maintenance. So that's what I've done for this bike to keep it running, and this thing runs, just like it did when it was brand new. So I've said this before in some of my other videos, but I want to say it again, because every time I jump on this bike, I'm just reminded of how balanced this bike is. The front and the rear just feel like they're working in harmony, and that's really important in a cross-country bike. It's Giant nailed the geometry with this bike, and I've said that in my other videos, but it's just worth saying again what a great job Giant did on mainly the head tube angle and the chainstay length is what helps this bike. But everything on this bike, I think, just works very, very well together. And what I mean also by a bike being balanced is how the bike feels in the corner. And just to give you an example, the other day I was hitting a corner really hard, and the bike, I started to lose it a little bit in the corner. The bike went, I mean, completely sideways, but I was able to correct the bike and bring it back into balance and stay upright. And that's a problem that I had with a 29er. In fact, it was the Anthem X 29er. I like 29-inch wheels, but that bike, the chainstays were so long. And again, I know I've said this in other videos, but because the chainstays were so long on that bike, if I started to lose the front end, it was hard to correct. And I actually had some slide outs. This bike is just a lot easier to correct. And again, the front and the rear, when you're cornering, they just feel like they work together. It doesn't feel like the front end turns a lot quicker than the rear, or vice versa. And so on this bike, because of the nailed geometry, you also, when you get into the corners, you're able to kind of bring the rear. It's almost like you can turn the rear when you turn the front. And that allows you to get around tight corners really well, which is something important to me because of how tight our trails are. And that's why I prefer 27.5 wheels over the 29ers. Again, I've owned some really good 29ers in the past, but they were just a little bit too sluggish for me for the quick corner after corner. Diving into a corner, sprinting, going into another corner, which is kind of typifies the type of riding that I do mainly on my local trails. So again, that's why I prefer the 27.5. Just a comment on the 1x10 drivetrain on this bike. I featured this in another video where it was kind of how to build a 1x10. I'm still enjoying this drivetrain. This has a 34 tooth chainring on the front, 1136 in the back. And I haven't needed any more gear, higher or lower on this. Now I do typically ride this bike in flatter terrain, so no really long extended climbs. We have some steep climbs, but they're not long and extended. So because the bike is so light, I'm able to get away with a 34 in the front and a 36 in the back. I haven't needed a 42 in the back. I'm able to get up some pretty steep climbs because this bike, the suspension really firms up good when you're pedaling hard. And again, the bike is light. This bike is about 24 pounds with the Stans podium wheels. So the drivetrain, again, has worked very well for me on this bike, and I've had no issues with it. And let me just make one more comment on the drivetrain. It is a narrow wide front chain ring, so it holds the chain on without needing a chain guide. I've dropped the chain one time over the 16 months of riding this bike. So that's pretty good. I can't remember why the chain dropped. It was just kind of one of those things where, you hit a bump or shift or something all at the same time, and it dropped the chain. So just one chain drop. So that's really good for me on this drivetrain. So I am running the Schwalbe Rocket Ron tires on this bike, and you can see the rear is ready to be replaced. I do have 2 new tires ready to go on this bike. And so that is my next maintenance job that I will do on this Anthem. Other than that, there's really nothing that I need to do. No real problems with the suspension other than just that little ticking noise that changing the bearings had taken care of. So no maintenance catastrophes on this bike at all. And I've owned quite a few Giants over the years, and they have been one of the most maintenance-free bikes that I have owned, and so I don't anticipate any problems with this bike. Now I did mention that I'm going to probably change out this frame for 2016. I really like the spec of the carbon XT model that Giant has put out for 2016. So when I put this frame up for sale, I may just kind of mention that I'm going to look at selling the whole bike and replace it with that. But I really like the Stans wheel, so I'm not really going to price it at a place where it would just sell quickly. I would want to get a pretty good amount for the bike, so I'm probably just going to focus on selling the frame and fork because I really like the spec that I put on this bike. I do have the race face bar. I had a flatter bar on this bike that I changed out for this race face, which has an 8-degree back sweep, 4-degree up, 20mm rise, and it's 725 wide. So I prefer that bar over the flatter one that I had originally. It does have a 90mm stem. It does have the WTV saddle, so I'm really liking the components. The component I like the most on this bike are these Stans ZTR podium wheels. These things are just awesome. They are stiff enough for me, and they're super light. A little more expensive than the Crest, but it really helps keep the weight of this bike down. One note that I'll also make is that if I do end up selling the frame and fork, there is a chance I may try a 120 fork on this. I know several people out there have asked me about the 120 fork on the Giant Anthem. I think it would make a really good trail bike, a really fast trail bike. It's going to slow down the handling a little bit. My only concern with that is I don't want to throw off the balance of this bike, and so I want to make sure that the new 2016 forks can be taken apart and spaced down to 100, just in case I don't like the way that it handles, because again, the beauty of this bike is just how balanced it feels, and I don't want to throw that off. But I'm thinking about it, so if I do that, of course I will make a video on what I think of the 120 fork on the Anthem. So that's going to wrap it up for this long-term report on the Giant Anthem 27.5. If you haven't seen any of my other reviews, I did kind of a series from when I first got it and built it up to the final review that I spoke about a little while ago. So go back and watch those if you haven't. Thanks for watching.